As we were mentioning at the beginning of the show, Krystal Ball has been in a little bit of hot water on Twitter for some recent comments she made about the candidacy of Dr. Cornel West in the context of Cornel West's recent dispute with Bernie Sanders. They were trading remarks on cable news and on podcasts, kind of going back and forth and hashing out their strategic disagreement over the third party route and, whether or not it's important for progressives to unify behind Joe Biden or to kind of vote for Cornel West and try to get the Green Party to 5%, even if that ends up hurting Biden in the long run. So let's take a listen to this clip here, which has been categorized as deranged commentary from Krystal Ball by Neoliberal Tears, an account on Twitter. So let's take a look at this. It's definitely an interesting exchange, and I'm sure everyone's going to have some opinions on this one.
Only thing that Cornel West, Dr. West, who I love, admire, respect, whose politics I almost wholly and completely share, I think effectively the only thing that his campaign will accomplish is, number one, helping to reelect Donald Trump, and number two, hurting the left. Because ultimately, there's just a poll that came out that showed Biden and Trump basically tied in a head-to-head. You throw Cornel West in and Trump is winning by like 5 points. And the margin is just exactly the amount that Dr. West takes away from Joe Biden. Now, listen, it's fully on Joe Biden that he needs to do more to appeal to potential Cornel West voters. But let's live in the land of reality of how this is going to work out. They're not going to do that. Dr. West will take some percentage, relatively small percentage, away from the Democratic total, and it makes it easier for Donald Trump to get elected. So if your priority is reelecting a Democrat, and if you believe, as I do, that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not equivalent, that Joe Biden has been better in particular on economics, but also with things like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, then yeah, I think a third party effort makes it more likely that Donald Trump gets reelected. And the reason why I say I think it will ultimately also hurt the left wing and left principles, if that's what you care about, is we have the model of 2016. Look, the theory in 2016 with Jill Stein was if we withhold our votes from the Democrats and that's going to force them to the table, we're going to have a voice in the room, they're going to have to come to our side. No, that's not what they did. Instead, they demonized anyone who would have even considered Jill Stein. They used it to demonize the left. They used it to undercut any sort of leftward push. And so while I would love to imagine that that theory of the case would work out, we've seen the reality, and that is not what happens. Now, the place where I profoundly disagree with Bernie Sanders is on his orientation towards the Democratic primary. And there's another section of this where he gets asked specifically about the Democratic primary. And he says, no, I think we need to unify behind Joe Biden because that will be what helps to defeat Donald Trump. Well, that's exactly the argument that was used against Bernie Sanders himself.
Yes.
Both in 2016 and again in 2020.
I did make that point myself a few times the other day, but wow, a lot to unpack from Krystal, even in this just 2-minute clip from what was a larger segment on breaking points. A couple of things that I was surprised to hear from her. One was that she kind of pulled out the card against the Jill Stein voters, man. She kind of pulled out the card against the Jill Stein voters. And I would like to point out that the Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote in 2016. It wasn't like the Jill Stein voters in California, were keeping, Hillary Clinton out of the White House. It wasn't like there were, you know what I mean? And also, Jill Stein didn't even do terribly well in that election. It wasn't like, the numbers that Cornel West would do. And before I toss it back to you, Gavin, I feel like I would have used that poll that she brings up to make the exact opposite point. What are you talking about? It does nothing for the left. It actually, for the first time, would see the Green Party getting to 5% and receiving national funding. And I think that Cornel West making the case that if you are in a safe blue state like California, like New York, like Washington, where you're going to have a blue president, I think it's worth it to try and get 5%. And I don't see how that hurts the left at all. But go on, Gavin. I know you're going to have thoughts on this as well.
Yeah. So, I can understand what Krystal's trying to articulate here about kind of putting herself in Bernie Sanders' shoes and saying, well, if your strategic conclusion is that we have to get Donald Trump out of the White House at all costs, or rather we have to prevent him from returning to the White House at all costs, then, in Bernie's opinion, the most effective way to do that would be uniting behind Joe Biden and, not entertaining this idea of voting Green Party in 2020 2024 because of the fact that it's not really viable, and the two viable options are, unfortunately, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So she's kind of trying to articulate Bernie's perspective there. And I understand, as I said the other day on the show, this is a perspective that Bernie Sanders has held for a while now, basically for the entire 21st century. I mean, we've never really seen him get on board with a third party
well, you keep saying
candidacy. I'm getting to my point. I'm just laying out the fact that, like, I understand where Bernie's coming from. I did give him the benefit of the doubt, and I kind of, defended him a little bit the other day on the show. But where I totally disagree with Krystal is when she implies that somehow Cornel West's candidacy is going to make the left look bad, and that it somehow is actually going to spoil the election and help Donald Trump. Now, she seems to contradict herself. If you watch this entire clip, and maybe we can pull this up later, she seems to contradict herself a little bit, because later in the same segment, she does kind of criticize or call out the whole, Jill Stein argument, and said it was completely ridiculous and inaccurate of the Democrats and of Hillary Clinton to blame Jill Stein for spoiling that election. So seemingly there's a bit of a contradiction here in this clip, and it's unclear if that's actually what Krystal believes herself, that Cornel West is going to steal this or spoil this election, or if she's just saying that that's what Bernie Sanders believes, because again, that's the context in which they're having this discussion. As I said, in the same clip, she goes on to call out people for blaming Jill Stein for spoiling the election and electing Donald Trump. So there is a little bit of weird inconsistency in this clip. But generally, yeah, I don't think that this campaign from Cornel West is going to make the left look bad at all. If anything, I think that Joe Biden makes the left look bad, because if people think Joe Biden is a representation of what leftism is, that's not inspiring. I mean, milquetoast neoliberalism is the opposite of inspiring. It's the opposite of what people actually need right now in this country. In order to make their lives better, right? So I totally disagree with that. Plus, even though, yeah, obviously some like New York Times liberals and people on MSNBC, those people blame Jill Stein, and I guess in their eyes she made the left look bad. But as far as average people, as far as average Americans and voters go, like if you go up to them and ask them who's responsible for Donald Trump getting elected, or why did Donald Trump get elected, they're not going to blame Jill Stein. They're not going to go to, oh yeah, that was Jill Stein's fault, everyone knows that, that's common knowledge. No, that's like a very niche, like MSNBC, New York Times kind of take that you're only going to arrive at if you're just saturated in liberal media garbage. So I totally disagree that even if Cornel West took 5 or 6% and tossed the election to Donald Trump, even if that happened, which I don't think that's going to happen, but even if that did happen, I don't think your average normie American would then turn around and for the rest of time blame Cornel West and lefties for Donald Trump. I think that they're a little bit more sophisticated than that. And again, the only people that I ever hear blaming Jill Stein or blaming Ralph Nader for the election of Republicans are like, New York Times reading liberals who already aren't going to vote for those candidates anyway.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think that the problem that I come across is that a lot of times people who make the anti-third party argument, they want to say, well, oh, because of the way our election system works, like it's just not viable for a third party, right? But then they'll parrot this line of crap to you where they'll be like, oh, look at this national popular poll where it shows that 5% of the voting could go to Donald Trump. That'll swing him the election. But everybody knows that this country does not decide our president based off of the popular vote. It's decided by an electoral college. So Cornel West could happily take 5, 6, 7% away from Joe Biden, and it still would not affect the electoral college outcome, right? Like we talked about how, Ross Perot took damn near 20% of the popular vote, didn't get a single electoral college vote, right? Because he didn't win a single state, right? That's how our fucking country works, right? But what we need is for the Green Party to get to 5%. That is a meaningful goal, and you can do that without jeopardizing, Donald Trump becoming the president again, right? Or Joe Biden's reelection bid, right? It's all on him. And the other thing I thought was interesting, right, is I know that Krystal hates the whole voter shaming argument, but it seems like she almost does flirt with it a little bit there. She doesn't want to fully employ it. She's like, well, if you look at it, Cornel West takes votes away. And I hate to call it that. And I know it's up to Joe Biden to win those voters back. But then I'm going to go ahead and conclude everything that the people who, typically say that, the Green Party takes votes away from Joe Biden conclude, which is that it's a complete waste of time and it's bad for the left in order to, to support a third party candidate. So yeah, I just wish that we would be able to have a conversation that's like, yes, I understand that, you know, if you're in a swing state and you want to vote for Joe Biden, I think that totally makes sense. I think at that point your vote does matter. And if I'm in Pennsylvania, you know, I would be in a different situation. I would say, oh yeah, well here I'm actually doing my duty to keep Trump out of office. But if I'm in California and I know I'm literally lighting my vote on fire to vote for a Democrat, maybe I could actually put it to use. Maybe I could actually make it have some value by supporting somebody like Cornel West. Or how about the other example that I gave when we were debating Vosh, which is that, hey, if I'm a voter in Alabama, my vote is literally less than worthless if I vote for a Democrat, but I can make it worthwhile for me to participate in my national election for my government, for my president, by voting for Cornel West, who is somebody who ideologically I agree with, and also I now have, I'm making meaningful change by getting him to 5% in a way where I'm also not jeopardizing, submitting the country to like fucking borderline fascist rule by Donald Trump.
Right. I mean, that's the kind of strategy that I've been advocating for here on the Vanguard, that we've both been advocating for, that if you live in a safe state, then yeah, definitely, vote your conscience. And if that means voting for Joe Biden to keep Donald Trump out, I can certainly sympathize with that position. I really, truly can. But yeah, I think if you live in a safe state, if you live in a state like Missouri, which Zach and I live in, or if you live in a state like, California, which is certainly going to go blue, then yeah, you might as well vote for Cornel West. You might as well vote for the Green Party, try to get the Green Party to 5%, raise awareness about the ideas and the issues that Cornel West is trying to elevate in this election. And by the way, just in case anyone out there isn't aware, this is a strategy. The strategy that Zach and I are advocating right now is one that Ralph Nader himself advocated for when he was running for president. I forget if it was in 2000 or 2004, but he literally advocated the same strategy. He said, if you live in a safe state, vote for the Green Party. But if you live in a swing state, we got to keep George Bush out of the White House. So do what you got to do. This is Green Party.
I think that
logic.
was 04 because it was after Iraq.
Right. Yeah, that was in 04 because he recognized how serious the threat of George Bush was. And he was like, we got to keep George Bush out of the White House. So, if you want to vote for Kerry and you live in one of the 6 or 8 states where your vote actually matters, then, do what you got to do. But if you live in Alabama or California, then yeah, let's get the Green Party to 5% so we don't have to keep, swallowing this fake choice and having to vote for the lesser of two evils, having to eat half a bowl of shit instead of a full bowl of shit every single election cycle, as Nina Turner once said, right? So yeah, like on one hand, I think that Krystal Ball has been fairly consistent, like Bernie Sanders, with her strategic opinion that it's a lot more possible to find reform or to succeed as a progressive movement by trying to reform the Democratic Party from within rather than trying to win or build a third party movement, or sorry, rather than trying to win as a third party or build a third party movement. That's been her opinion for a while. So I don't think it's fair to come out here and be like, Krystal Ball is all of a sudden just sucking up to the Democrats and, all of a sudden she's trashing third parties. Like, she has had this opinion about how, it's much, much easier to do what Bernie did, for example, than what Jill Stein tried to do. And, Bernie got a lot closer to the presidency than Jill Stein ever did. That's been her opinion for a while. But what I do take issue with is her comments where she does appear to kind of invoke the spoiler effect argument, saying that Cornel West is really going to throw this election to Donald Trump, saying that the American people will blame him for the election of Donald Trump, and that somehow Cornel West's candidacy will end up making the left look bad. I don't buy into those arguments at all. Like I said, I don't think any average normie American blames Jill Stein for the election of Donald Trump in the first place. I don't think most normie Americans even know who Jill Stein is. And if Cornel West is out there, in mainstream media spaces, on cable news, making the case for Medicare for all, making the case to, resist the military industrial complex and reel in our presence abroad, our military presence abroad, then I don't see how that makes the left look bad. I see that as, thank God we have a communicator that's out here in these mainstream spaces that's actually speaking truth to power, that's actually saying things that are going to resonate with normal Americans who are suffering right now and who are the victims of the sort of neoliberalism that Joe Biden represents.